The autumn leaves danced through the crisp Seoul air as Park Min-jun stepped out of his black BMW, his designer coat catching the golden afternoon light filtering through the trees of Hongdae. At 26, he was everything Seoul's elite circle expected him to be: devastatingly handsome, heir to one of Korea's largest tech conglomerates, and utterly untouchable when it came to matters of the heart. His sharp jawline and cold, calculating eyes had broken more hearts than he cared to count, and he wore his reputation as Seoul's most eligible bachelor-like armor. But today, that armor was about to be tested. "You're late," came the smooth voice of his best friend, Kang Woo-bin, as Min-jun approached their usual table at the exclusive rooftop cafe overlooking the Han River. Woo-bin's perfectly styled hair caught the breeze as he gestured toward the empty chair across from him, a knowing smirk playing on his lips. Min-jun settled into his seat with practiced nonchalance, his movements fluid and controlled. "Traffic was murder. What's so urgent that you couldn't wait until tonight's board meeting?" Woo-bin leaned back in his chair, studying his friend with a calculating gaze of someone who had known him since their university days at Seoul National. "I have a proposition for you. Something that might actually provide you with some entertainment." The word hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that made Min-jun's eyes narrow slightly. In their world, entertainment usually meant trouble, and trouble usually meant someone was about to get hurt. Not that Min-jun particularly cared. Emotions were a luxury he had learned to abandon long ago, buried beneath years of corporate training and family expectations. "I'm listening," Min-jun said, his voice betraying nothing of the curiosity that flickered behind his dark eyes. Woo-bin pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be social media profiles before turning the screen toward Min-jun. The image that greeted him was of a young woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile, her long black hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She was pretty in an understated way, not the kind of striking beauty that usually graced the arms of Seoul's elite, but there was something about her expression, something genuine and unguarded, that made Min-jun pause. "Lee So Young," Woo-bin announced with theatrical flair. 24 years old, works at that little bookshop cafe in Itaewon, the one where all the university students hang out. She's different. Min-jun's eyebrow arched skeptically. "Different how?" "She doesn't know who you are." The words hit Min-jun like a physical blow. In a city where his family's name opened doors and his face graced the covers of business magazines, the idea that someone could exist in Seoul without knowing his identity seemed almost impossible. Woo-bin continued, clearly enjoying the effect his revelation was having. "I was there last week meeting with some investors from that startup in Gangnam. She served our table, and when one of them mentioned the Park Group, she looked completely blank. I tested it, dropped your name, mentioned your father's company, even showed her a picture from last month's gala. Nothing. She has no idea who Park Min-jun is." A slow smile spread across Min-jun's face, but it wasn't the warm expression that graced his public appearances. This smile was sharp-edged and predatory, the look of a hunter who had just spotted particularly interesting prey. "And?" he prompted, though he suspected he already knew where this conversation was heading. "And I thought you might find it refreshing to interact with someone who sees you as just another man instead of a walking dollar sign." Woo-bin's grin widened. "Unless, of course, you don't think you could make her fall for ordinary Park Min-jun." The challenge was unmistakable, and Min-jun felt the familiar thrill of competition surge through his veins. He had built his reputation on being untouchable, unbeatable, whether in boardrooms or in matters of the heart. The idea that some small-town girl working in a bookshop cafe might prove immune to his considerable charms was both intriguing and insulting. "What exactly are you proposing?" Min-jun asked, though his tone suggested he was already committed to whatever game Woo-bin had in mind. "Simple. I bet you can't make her fall in love with you within 3 months. Real love, not just attraction or infatuation. The kind where she'd choose you over anyone else, where she'd trust you with her deepest secrets." Woo-bin paused, savoring the moment. "But here's the catch. You have to do it without revealing who you really are. No family connections, no corporate credit cards, no penthouse apartment, just you." Min-jun was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table as he considered the proposition. It was ridiculous, really. He was Park Min-jun. Women had been throwing themselves at him since he was in high school, drawn by his looks, his money, or his status. The idea that he needed any of those things to win over one insignificant bookshop girl was almost laughable. Almost. "And if I win?" he asked finally. "That vintage Patek Philippe you've been coveting. The one from my grandfather's collection." Min-jun's eyes lit up. He had been trying to acquire that particular timepiece for years, but Woo-bin had stubbornly refused every offer. It was worth more than most people's cars, and more importantly, it was the one thing in Seoul that Min-jun wanted but couldn't buy. "And if I lose?" "You won't," Woo-bin said with confidence that bordered on mockery. "But on the impossible chance that you do, you sign over your shares in the Busan Resort project." The stakes were significant. The Busan project was Min-jun's personal passion, a luxury resort development that he had been planning for 3 years. But the confidence in Woo-bin's voice only fueled Min-jun's determination. He had never met a challenge he couldn't conquer, never encountered a heart he couldn't break or bend to his will. 3 months? Min-jun repeated, extending his hand across the table. "Starting when?" "Starting now," Woo-bin replied, clasping Min-jun's hand in a firm shake. "She works the evening shift at the cafe, Monday through Friday, 5 to closing." As they shook hands, sealing the bet that would change both their lives in ways neither could imagine, Min-jun felt a familiar rush of adrenaline that came with a new conquest. He had no way of knowing that across the city, Lee So-young was serving her last customer of the day with the same gentle smile that had captured Woo-bin's attention, completely unaware that her peaceful life was about to be turned upside down by a man who saw her as nothing more than a prize to be won. The next evening, Min-jun stood outside Pajis Pour, the small bookshop cafe tucked into a quiet corner of Itaewon. The establishment was everything his usual haunts were not: modest, cozy, and filled with the kind of people who valued substance over style. University students hunched over textbooks, their tables cluttered with coffee cups and highlighted notes. A few older patrons sat in comfortable armchairs, lost in novels while soft indie music played in the background. It was so far removed from his world of glass towers and power lunches that Min-jun almost felt like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. He had spent considerable time preparing for this moment, trading his usual designer suits for dark jeans and a simple sweater, clothes that probably cost more than most of the cafe's customers made in a month, but looked appropriately understated. He had even driven his older BMW instead of the Maserati, though he had parked it several blocks away to avoid drawing attention. The bell above the door chimed softly as he entered, and Min-jun found himself scanning the small space with the calculating gaze of a predator surveying new territory. The cafe was warm and inviting, with exposed brick walls lined with bookshelves and small tables scattered throughout. The scent of coffee and old books created an atmosphere that was almost homey. And then he saw her. Lee So-young stood behind the counter, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail as she prepared what appeared to be an elaborate latte art design. She was focused entirely on her work, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she guided the steamed milk into delicate patterns. When she finished, she looked up with a satisfied smile, and Min-jun felt something unexpected stir in his chest. She was even prettier in person than in Woo-bin's photos, but it wasn't her beauty that caught him off guard. It was the complete absence of calculation in her expression, the genuine warmth that seemed to radiate from her like sunshine. In Min-jun's world, every smile was measured, every expression calculated for maximum impact. But So-young's smile was unconscious and natural, the kind that made you want to smile back, without thinking about why. "Can I help you?" she asked as he approached the counter, and her voice was exactly what he had expected, soft and melodious, with the slight accent that marked her as being from outside Seoul. Min-jun had planned his opening line carefully, but standing there under the warmth of her genuine attention, he found himself momentarily speechless. It had been so long since someone had looked at him without recognition, without the weight of expectations and assumptions. that he almost didn't know how to respond. Yes, he managed, then cleared his throat and tried again. I'd like a coffee. Something simple. Simple is good, so, Young agreed with a smile that made her eyes crinkle at the corners. Americano? Or maybe something with a little more character. There was something about the way she said character that made Minjun suspect she was talking about more than just coffee. What would you recommend? She studied him for a moment, and Minjun found himself holding his breath, wondering what she saw when she looked at him. Not Park Minjun, heir and heartbreaker, but just him. You look like someone who appreciates quality, but doesn't need to show off about it, she said finally. I'm thinking a cortado. Simple, elegant, but with more depth than most people expect. The description was so accurate it was almost unnerving. Minjun nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and watched as So Young moved with practiced efficiency behind the counter. Her movements were graceful and unhurried, each action deliberate and caring. When she handed him the finished drink, their fingers brushed briefly, and Minjun felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with static electricity. Thank you, he said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with the coffee. You're welcome, So Young replied, but instead of turning to the next customer, she lingered, studying his face with curious eyes. Are you new to the neighborhood? I don't think I've seen you here before. This was his opening, the perfect opportunity to begin weaving the web that would eventually capture her heart. Minjun had planned to create an elaborate backstory, something romantic and intriguing that would draw her in. Instead, he found himself saying, I work in the city. I was just looking for somewhere quiet. It wasn't entirely a lie. He did work in the city, and he was looking for something, though it wasn't quiet he was after. But standing there in the warm light of the cafe, with So Young's attention focused entirely on him, Minjun discovered that he didn't want to lie to her. Not yet, anyway. Well, you found it. So, Young said with satisfaction, this place is my favorite refuge from the chaos out there. Books, coffee, and people who understand that sometimes you need to slow down and breathe. Is that what you do here, slow down and breathe? Among other things, she said with a laugh that was like music, I'm actually working my way through the classic section, one book at a time, whenever things get quiet. Minjun glanced around the cafe, noting the worn spines of countless books, the comfortable reading nooks, the general atmosphere of scholarly sanctuary. What are you reading now? Pride and Prejudice. Again. So, Young's cheeks flushed slightly, as if she was embarrassed by the admission. I know it's not very sophisticated, but there's something about Elizabeth and Darcy's story that I never get tired of. The mention of Pride and Prejudice sent an unexpected jolt through Minjun's system. He had read Austen's novel years ago during his university literature requirements, but now he found himself thinking about the parallels with uncomfortable clarity. Darcy, the proud and wealthy man who initially looks down on Elizabeth. Elizabeth, the spirited woman who sees through his arrogance to the man beneath. The irony was not lost on him. I don't think it's unsophisticated at all, Minjun heard himself saying. Sometimes the stories that endure are the ones that understand something fundamental about human nature. So Young's eyes widened with surprise, and something that might have been delight. Exactly. Everyone always acts like it's just a romance novel, but it's really about seeing past first impressions, about how pride and prejudice can blind us to what's really important. As she spoke, her whole face lit up with enthusiasm, and Minjun found himself genuinely captivated. He had expected to find her attractive. Wu Bin wouldn't have chosen an unappealing target, but he hadn't expected to find her interesting. In his world, most conversations were exercises in strategic positioning, each word calculated for maximum advantage. But So Young spoke with passionate sincerity about things that mattered to her, without any apparent agenda beyond sharing her thoughts. It was refreshing in a way that Minjun hadn't realized he'd been craving. Do you have time to sit? So Young asked suddenly, glancing around the relatively quiet cafe. I mean, if you're not in a hurry. It's rare to find someone who wants to talk about books instead of just using the Wi-Fi. Minjun hesitated, He had planned to make this first encounter brief, to establish initial contact and then retreat, letting anticipation build before his next move. But looking at So Young's hopeful expression, he found his carefully constructed strategy crumbling. "I have time," he said, and followed her to a small table by the window. What followed was one of the most unusual conversations of Minjun's adult life. They talked about books, about the differences between Seoul and So Young's hometown of Daegu, about the peculiar magic of bookshop cafes and the way certain places could make you feel like you belong. So Young was intelligent and well-read, but more than that, she was genuinely interested in the world around her. She asked questions not to gather information for some hidden purpose, but because she actually wanted to know the answers. Minjun found himself sharing things he hadn't talked about in years. His love of architecture, his secret fondness for old movies, his complicated relationship with the city that had shaped him. He was careful to keep his revelations vague, avoiding any details that might reveal his true identity. But even so, he was sharing more of himself than he had with anyone in recent memory. "You know, So," Young said as the evening wore on and the cafe began to empty, "you're not what I expected when you first walked in." "What did you expect?" Minjun asked, genuinely curious. "Someone more guarded, I suppose. You have this way of carrying yourself, like you're used to being watched. But then you start talking about books and old movies, and you get this expression." She trailed off, looking slightly embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't mean to analyze you." Occupational hazard of spending too much time with books. But Minjun wasn't offended. If anything, he was intrigued by her perceptiveness. She had seen through his carefully constructed facade more quickly than most people who had known him for years. "What expression?" he prompted. "Like you remember what it feels like to enjoy something just for the sake of enjoying it." "So," Young said softly, "it's nice. It makes you seem real." The word hit Minjun with unexpected force. Real. When was the last time someone had called him that? When was the last time he had felt real, instead of like he was playing an elaborate role in someone else's production? "I should probably close up." "So," Young said, glancing at the clock on the wall. "But would you like to come back tomorrow? I mean, if you're not too busy with work in the city." Minjun looked into her hopeful eyes and felt something shift inside his chest, something that felt dangerously like genuine affection. This was supposed to be a game, a calculated conquest to win a bet and prove a point. But sitting across from So Young in the warm glow of the cafe, watching her unconscious grace as she gathered empty cups and straightened books, Minjun found himself forgetting about Woobin and wagers and everything else except the simple desire to see her smile again. "I'll be here," he promised, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a very long time. As Minjun walked back to his car through the quiet streets of Itaewon, he tried to analyze what had just happened. He had gone into the cafe with a clear objective: to begin the process of making Lee So Young fall in love with him. Mission accomplished, he supposed. She had invited him back, had seemed genuinely interested in continuing their conversation. By any measure, the evening had been a success. So why did he feel like something fundamental had changed? The next few weeks fell into a pattern that became the highlight of Minjun's days. Every evening after work, he would make the drive from his office in Gangnam to the little cafe in Itaewon, trading his corporate armor for casual clothes and his calculating executive persona for something that felt increasingly natural. He would order coffee. So Young had introduced him to half a dozen different preparations, each one revealing new layers of complexity, and they would talk. They talked about everything and nothing. So Young shared stories from her childhood in Daegu, painting pictures of a life that was simple and warm and utterly foreign to Minjun's experience. She had grown up in a small house with parents who ran a neighborhood restaurant, where the measure of success was whether their customers left satisfied and happy. She had come to Seoul for university, studying literature with dreams of becoming a teacher, but had fallen in love with the bookshop cafe and decided to stay. "My parents think I'm crazy," she admitted one evening as she prepared to close the shop. They can't understand why I'd choose this over a real career. But this place, it feels like home in a way that nowhere else ever has. Minjun, who had inherited his career along with his name and had never questioned whether it was what he actually wanted, found her certainty both enviable and incomprehensible. "Don't you want more?" he asked. "Security, success, recognition? What's more than being happy?" So Young countered, and the simple question stopped Minjun cold. In his world, happiness was a luxury that came after achievement, something you earned through conquest and accumulation. The idea that someone could choose happiness as a primary goal, could prioritize contentment over advancement, was so foreign to his experience that he didn't know how to process it. But watching So Young move through her days with quiet satisfaction, seeing the genuine joy she took in small pleasures, the perfect latte art, a customer's grateful smile, a particularly beautiful passage in a book, Minjun began to understand what she meant. There was something to be said for a life where you woke up each morning eager for the day ahead, where work felt like play, and success was measured in moments of connection rather than digits in a bank account. It was a dangerous line of thinking for someone whose entire identity was built on ambition and acquisition, but Minjun found himself indulging in it more and more as the days passed. Their conversations grew deeper and more personal as So Young began to trust him with her thoughts and dreams. She told him about her writing poetry that she composed in quiet moments and stories that lived in notebooks she was too shy to share. She talked about her fears of being ordinary, of living a small life in a world that seemed to value only grand gestures and dramatic success. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm being cowardly," she confessed one evening as they walked along the Han River after the cafe closed. It had become their routine. Minjun would wait while she locked up, and then they would walk together through the quiet streets, extending their time together for as long as possible. Staying here, in this safe little bubble, instead of taking risks and chasing something bigger. "There's nothing cowardly about knowing what makes you happy," Minjun replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "Most people spend their entire lives chasing things they think they want, never stopping to figure out what they actually need." So Young stopped walking and turned to look at him, her expression thoughtful in the glow of the streetlights. "Is that what you're doing? Chasing things you think you want?" The question hit too close to home, and Minjun felt his carefully constructed walls threaten to crumble. I used to think I knew what I wanted, but lately," he trailed off, unable to finish the thought without revealing more than he was ready to share. But So Young seemed to understand anyway. She reached out and touched his arm gently, a simple gesture that sent warmth spreading through Minjun's entire body. "It's okay not to know," she said softly. "Sometimes the best discoveries happen when we stop looking so hard for answers." As they continued their walk in comfortable silence, Minjun found himself thinking about the irony of the situation. He had come here to make So Young fall in love with him, but somewhere along the way, he had begun to fall for her instead. Not just her beauty or her sweetness, but her way of seeing the world, her quiet wisdom, her ability to find joy in simple things. It was a complication he hadn't anticipated, and it made the deception at the heart of their relationship feel increasingly unbearable. Every evening, as he changed from his designer suits into carefully chosen casual clothes, he felt like he was putting on a costume to play a role. But which was the costume? The corporate executive, or the ordinary man who sat in bookshop cafes discussing literature? The question became more pressing as Minjun found himself thinking about So Young during board meetings, distracted by memories of her laugh while he was supposed to be analyzing market projections. His assistant had started giving him strange looks when he declined evening social events, choosing instead to drive across the city to spend time in a cafe that probably generated less revenue in a month than his company made in an hour. "You're different lately," Wu Bin observed during one of their regular lunches at their exclusive club. "Distracted, almost happy." Minjun tensed, suddenly aware that his friend was studying him with the calculating gaze that had made him one of Seoul's most successful venture capitalists. "I'm fine. Just busy with the Busan project." Ah, yes, the project you're about to lose to me, Woobin said with satisfaction. How is our little bookshop girl anyway? Please tell me you're not actually developing feelings for her. The casual dismissal in Woobin's voice made Minjun's jaw clench. Her name is So Young, and she's not what I expected. None of them are, in the beginning, Woobin replied with the voice of experience. That's what makes the game interesting. But don't forget what this is really about, Minjun. You're not actually planning to keep her around after you win, are you? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Minjun found himself unable to answer. 3 months ago, the assumption would have been obvious. Of course he wouldn't keep her around. Once the bet was won and his point was proven, he would find a way to extricate himself from the situation and return to his real life. But now, sitting in the club where he had spent countless afternoons discussing conquests and acquisitions, Minjun realized that he couldn't imagine his life without So Young's gentle presence in it. The 3 months are almost up, Woobin continued, apparently taking Minjun's silence as agreement. Have you gotten her to fall for you yet? Minjun thought about the way So Young's face lit up when she saw him enter the cafe each evening, the comfortable silences they shared, the gentle way she had begun to touch his arm when she made a point or laughed at something he said. He thought about the previous night, when she had fallen asleep reading in one of the cafe's armchairs, and how he had covered her with his jacket without thinking about it. When she woke up, she had looked at him with such trust and affection that it had taken his breath away. I think so, he said quietly. You think so? Woobin's eyebrows shot up. Minjun, this is a yes or no question. Has she told you she loves you? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple, Woobin interrupted. The bet was that you could make her fall in love with you. Real love. Not just affection or attraction. Has she said the words? Minjun shook his head, and Woobin smiled with satisfaction. Then you haven't won yet. Better hurry. You have less than 2 weeks left. That evening, Minjun arrived at the cafe with Woobin's words echoing in his mind. He had been so caught up in the gentle progression of his relationship with So Young that he had almost forgotten the artificial deadline hanging over them. But now, watching her prepare his usual cortado with the same careful attention she gave to everything, he felt the weight of deception settling over him like a shroud. You seem quiet tonight, So Young observed as she set the cup in front of him. Everything okay? Minjun looked into her concerned eyes and felt something crack inside his chest. Can I ask you something? Of course. How do you feel about me? About us? So Young blinked in surprise, and a soft blush colored her cheeks. That's a big question. I know, but I need to know. She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers playing nervously with the strings of her apron. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but steady. I feel like I've been waiting for you my whole life without knowing it, she said. Like all those nights I spent reading romance novels and wondering if that kind of connection was real. You've shown me that it is. You make me want to be braver, to take risks, to believe in happy endings. She paused, looking down at her hands before meeting his eyes again. I love you, she said simply. I know it's only been a few months, and maybe it's too soon to say it, but I love you. The way you listen when I talk about books, the way you remember little things I mention in passing, the way you look at me like I'm the most interesting person in the world. I love that you chose this place, chose me, when you could probably have anyone. The words should have filled Minjun with triumph. He had won the bet, proven his point, secured the watch and his reputation. But instead of satisfaction, he felt only a crushing weight of guilt and self-loathing. So Young's declaration of love, offered with such vulnerable honesty, felt like a knife twisting in his chest. So Young, he began, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. You don't have to say it back, she interrupted quickly, mistaking his tone for rejection. I know I'm not. I mean, you're clearly out of my league. I just wanted you to know how I felt. Out of her league. If she only knew the truth, that he was the one who wasn't worthy of her, that their entire relationship was built on a foundation of lies and manipulation. You're wrong, Minjun said fiercely. You're not out of anyone's league, you're... He stopped, unable to finish the sentence without revealing more than he was ready to share. How could he tell her that she was the most genuine person he had ever met, the only one who had ever made him want to be better than he was? How could he explain that in her small cafe filled with books and dreams, he had found something he hadn't even known he was looking for? "I'm what?" So Young prompted gently. "You're perfect," Minjun said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. So Young's smile was radiant, and when she leaned across the table to kiss him softly, Minjun felt like he was being absolved and condemned at the same time. Her lips were warm and sweet, tasting of the vanilla latte she had been sipping, and when she pulled back, her eyes were shining with happiness. "I was hoping you'd say that," she whispered. That night, Minjun drove home through the glittering streets of Seoul, with So Young's declaration of love echoing in his mind. He had what he needed to win the bet. Her confession, witnessed by the few remaining customers in the cafe, was proof enough that he had succeeded in making her fall for him. He could call Woo Bin, claim victory, and collect his prize. But sitting in his penthouse apartment, surrounded by the trappings of his success, Minjun found himself thinking about So Young's words, "You make me want to be braver, to take risks, to believe in happy endings." When was the last time he had believed in happy endings? When was the last time he had taken a risk that wasn't calculated for maximum advantage? Looking around his pristine, sterile apartment, Minjun realized that he had built a life that was impressive but empty, successful but joyless. For the first time in years, he wanted something more than victory. He wanted to deserve the love that So Young had offered him so freely. The next morning, Minjun made a decision that would have shocked anyone who knew him. Instead of calling Woo Bin to claim his victory, he called his assistant and cleared his schedule for the day. Then he drove to Itaewon, not for his usual evening visit, but in the bright morning light when So Young would be opening the cafe for the day. He found her arranging books on a display table, humming softly to herself as she worked. The morning sun streaming through the windows caught the highlights in her hair, and she looked so beautiful and peaceful that Minjun almost turned around and left. What right did he have to disrupt her contentment with his complicated truths? But then So Young looked up and saw him, and her face broke into a smile so radiant that it took his breath away. "You're early today," she said, coming over to greet him with a quick kiss that felt as natural as breathing. "Did you miss me that much?" "I need to tell you something," Minjun said, the words coming out more abruptly than he had intended. Something in his tone must have alarmed her, because So Young's smile faded slightly. "Okay, should I be worried?" "I don't know," Minjun admitted. "Maybe." She led him to their usual table by the window, and Minjun found himself struggling to find the right words. How do you confess to someone that your entire relationship started as a lie? How do you explain that what began as manipulation had become the most real thing in your life? "I haven't been completely honest with you," he began, and watched So Young's expression shift from concern to something that might have been fear. "What do you mean?" Minjun took a deep breath, knowing that his next words would either free him or destroy the best thing that had ever happened to him. "My name is Park Minjun, and I'm the heir to Park Group. I drive a Maserati. I live in a penthouse in Gangnam, and until 3 months ago, I had never set foot in a place like this cafe." So Young stared at him in shock, her face going pale. "I don't understand. A friend of mine bet me that I couldn't make you fall in love with me without using my money or status. He said you were different, that you didn't know who I was, and I saw it as a challenge. A game." The words felt like poison leaving his mouth, and Minjun watched in horror as understanding dawned in So Young's eyes, followed quickly by pain and betrayal. "A game," she repeated softly. "It started as one," Minjun said desperately. "But So Young, you have to believe me. Somewhere along the way, it became real. Everything I told you about myself, about how I feel, that was all real." But So Young was shaking her head, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. "How can I believe anything you say? Our entire relationship is built on a lie." "Not the important parts," Minjun insisted. "The way I feel about you, the way you make me want to be better, that's all true. I love you, So Young." I love you more than I've ever loved anything in my life." "Don't." "So," Young said sharply, standing up from the table, "don't you dare say that to me. You don't love me. You don't even know me. I'm just some poor girl you decided to manipulate for your own entertainment. That's not true, isn't it?" So, Young's voice was rising, and other customers were beginning to stare. "Tell me, Minjun, was it fun watching me fall for your act? Did you and your friend have a good laugh about the naive little bookshop girl who actually believed that someone like you could care about someone like me?" "It wasn't like that," Minjun said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew how hollow they sounded, because it had been like that, at least in the beginning. He had seen her as a target, a challenge, a prize to be won. "Get out," So Young said quietly. "Please, just let me explain." "Get out!" she shouted, and now everyone in the cafe was staring openly. "Get out and don't come back. I never want to see you again." Minjun stood up slowly, his heart breaking, as he looked at the woman he loved more than his own life. So Young's face was streaked with tears, her eyes bright with pain and fury, and he knew that he had caused it all. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry, So Young." But she had already turned away from him, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Minjun walked out of Pages, poor knowing that he had just destroyed the only thing in his life that had ever truly mattered. The next few days passed in a haze of regret and self-recrimination. Minjun threw himself into work with a vengeance, staying at the office until the early hours of the morning, accepting every meeting and social obligation he had previously declined. But no amount of corporate success could fill the void that So Young's absence had left in his life. Woo Bin appeared in his office on the third day, looking insufferably pleased with himself. "I heard about your dramatic confession," he said, settling into the chair across from Minjun's desk. "Very noble of you, though ultimately pointless. You won the bet, you know. She did fall in love with you." Minjun looked up from the contracts he had been pretending to review. "I don't want the watch." "Don't be ridiculous. A bet is a bet. Besides, you proved your point. Even without your usual advantages, you're still irresistible to women." "She's not just any woman," Minjun said quietly. "And I didn't prove anything except that I'm exactly the kind of person I never wanted to be." Woo Bin's expression shifted from amusement to something approaching concern. "Minjun, you're not actually serious about this girl, are you? She's nobody. A bookshop employee who probably makes less in a year than you spend on wine." "She's the best person I've ever known," Minjun replied, and the conviction in his voice made Woo Bin blink in surprise. "She's kind and intelligent and genuine in ways that people in our world have forgotten how to be. She believed in me, not Park Minjun the heir, but just me. And I destroyed that." "So fix it," Woo Bin said, with the casual confidence of someone who had never encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with money or influence. "Send her flowers, buy her something expensive, take her somewhere nice. Women always forgive eventually." Minjun stared at his oldest friend and realized that they had nothing in common anymore. Had they ever? Or had he just been too blind to see the fundamental differences in their characters? "It doesn't work that way," Minjun said. "Not with her. She's not impressed by expensive things or grand gestures. She values honesty, authenticity, trust, all the things I threw away for a stupid bet." "Then what are you going to do?" Minjun was quiet for a long moment, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the Seoul skyline. Somewhere out there, So Young was probably serving coffee to customers who actually deserved her kindness, rebuilding the peaceful life he had shattered with his selfish games. "I'm going to try to become the kind of man who deserves her," he said finally. "Even if she never forgives me, even if I never see her again, I need to try to be better." Woo Bin looked at him like he had lost his mind. "You're talking about changing your entire life for someone who won't even speak to you?" "Yes," Minjun said simply. "I am." Meanwhile, across the city, So Young was discovering that heartbreak was nothing like the poetry she had read about it. There was no romance in the way grief sat in her chest like a physical weight. no beauty in the way tears came at unexpected moments throughout the day. She had thought she understood love and loss from all the novels she had devoured, but the reality was messier and more painful than any author had ever captured. She continued working at the cafe because she needed the routine, the familiar rhythms of grinding coffee beans and arranging books. But the place felt different now, tainted by memories of laughter and conversation, and the gentle warmth of what she had thought was love. Every evening, she found herself looking toward the door, half hoping and half dreading to see Min-jun's familiar silhouette. He never came. "You're punishing yourself," her friend Miran observed one evening as they walked along the Han River. Miran had been So-young's roommate at university and was now a successful marketing executive who had never understood So-young's choice to work in a bookshop cafe. "He lied to you, yes, but maybe he really does love you now. How can I trust anything he says?" So-young replied, pulling her coat tighter against the autumn wind. "Our entire relationship was built on deception. Every conversation, every moment of intimacy, every time he made me feel special, it was all part of an elaborate game. But what if it wasn't? What if he really did fall for you the way you fell for him?" So-young stopped walking and turned to face her friend. "It doesn't matter, Miran. Even if his feelings became real, the foundation of our relationship is rotten. How do you build something lasting on a lie?" Miran was quiet for a moment, studying So-young's face in the glow of the streetlights. "You really love him, don't you?" "I thought I did," So-young said softly. "But how can you love someone you don't really know? I fell in love with a persona he created, not the real Park Min-jun." "Maybe the persona was more real than you think." So-young shook her head. "The real Min-jun is someone who makes bets about other people's hearts, someone who sees love as a game to be won. That's not the kind of person I can be with." But even as she spoke the words, So-young found herself remembering moments that felt too genuine to be manufactured. The way Min-jun's eyes had lit up when she talked about books. The careful attention he paid to her stories about her family and dreams. The gentle way he had covered her with his jacket when she fell asleep reading. Had all of that really been an act? 2 weeks after their confrontation, So-young was working the evening shift when an elderly man entered the cafe. He was well-dressed but not flashy, with kind eyes and the sort of dignified bearing that spoke of quiet authority. He ordered a simple coffee and sat at a corner table with a book, but So-young noticed that he seemed more interested in observing the cafe than in reading. When the evening rush died down, he approached the counter. "Miss Lee So-young?" he asked politely. So-young tensed, immediately suspicious. "Yes? My name is Park Dong-woo. I believe you know my son, Min-jun." The coffee cup So-young had been cleaning slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor behind the counter. What do you want?" "Just to talk if you're willing. I understand that Min-jun hurt you very badly, and I want to apologize for that." So-young stared at the older man, seeing echoes of Min-jun's features in his face, but none of the calculating coldness she had expected. Park Dong-woo looked genuinely remorseful, and despite herself, So-young found her hostility wavering. "I don't want to talk about your son," she said, but without much conviction. "I understand, but would you be willing to listen? Just for a few minutes?" Against her better judgment, So-young found herself nodding. She finished cleaning up the broken cup, then sat across from Park Dong-woo at the same table where she had shared so many conversations with Min-jun. "First, I want you to know that I had nothing to do with that ridiculous bet," Park Dong-woo began. "I only learned about it recently, when Min-jun came to me asking for advice about how to win back someone he had wronged." "He's trying to win me back?" So-young asked, hating the way her heart jumped at the possibility. "In his way, yes, though perhaps not in the way you might expect." Park Dong-woo paused, choosing his words carefully. "My son has made many mistakes in his life, Miss Lee. I bear some responsibility for that. I raised him in a world where everything was transactional, where people were assets to be managed rather than individuals to be cherished. But I've never seen him as devastated as he's been these past few weeks." "He's devastated?" So-young couldn't keep the skepticism out of her voice. "He's quit his position at the company," Park Dong Wu said quietly. And so, Young's eyes widened in shock. Walked away from everything he's worked for, everything he was expected to inherit. He said he needed to figure out who he really was, separate from the Park family name and fortune. So Young felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Min-jun had given up his inheritance. The man who had seemed so confident in his corporate armor had walked away from everything. "I don't understand," she whispered. "He said that loving you had shown him the difference between who he was and who he wanted to be," Park Dong-woo continued. "He told me that he couldn't live with himself, knowing that he had caused you pain, and that he needed to become someone worthy of the love you had given him, even if you never forgave him." Tears were pricking at So Young's eyes again, but this time they weren't entirely born of pain. "Where is he now?" "Teaching, Park Dong," Wu said with a small smile. "English literature at a small school in Busan. He said he wanted to do something that mattered, something that would help people the way you helped him understand what was truly important." The image of Min-jun in a classroom, sharing his love of books with students, was so at odds with the corporate prince, she had thought she knew that So Young could barely process it. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because I think you deserve to know the truth about the impact you've had on my son's life," Park Dong-woo replied. "And because I think you should know that the man you fell in love with, the one who talked about books and old movies, who listened to your dreams and made you feel valued, that man was real. That was Min-jun without the armor he had built around himself. You didn't fall in love with a lie, Miss Lee. You fell in love with the person my son had forgotten he could be." Park Dong-woo stood up, leaving money for his coffee on the table. "I'm not asking you to forgive him or to take him back. What he did was wrong, and the consequences are his to bear. But I thought you should know that your love changed him in ways that I couldn't in 30 years of trying to be his father." After he left, So Young sat alone in the cafe as the evening light faded, trying to process everything she had learned. Min-jun had given up his inheritance to become a teacher. He was in Busan, hundreds of kilometers away, trying to build a new life based on the values she had shared with him. But did any of that change what he had done to her? That night, So Young found herself pulling out her laptop and searching for information about Min-jun's new life. It didn't take long to find him. There was an article in a local Busan newspaper about the former Chaebol heir who had shocked Seoul's business community by walking away from his family empire to teach at a small private school. The photo accompanying the article showed Min-jun in a simple sweater, surrounded by students who were clearly engaged and animated. His smile was different from the polished expression she remembered from their first meeting. It was genuine, unguarded, the same smile she had fallen in love with during their evenings at the cafe. So Young stared at the photo for a long time, her heart aching with a mixture of love and loss and something that might have been hope. 3 months passed. Min-jun settled into his new life in Busan with surprising ease, finding genuine satisfaction in the classroom in ways he had never experienced in corporate boardrooms. His students were bright and eager, and he discovered that he had a talent for bringing literature to life, for helping them see the universal truths hidden in stories of love and loss and redemption. But even as he built this new existence, So Young was never far from his thoughts. He wrote her letters that he never sent, started text messages that he deleted before sending, and found himself thinking about her every time he passed a bookshop or smelled coffee brewing. He had kept his promise to himself. He was becoming a better man, someone who valued authenticity over advantage, connection over conquest. But the transformation felt hollow without the possibility of sharing it with the woman who had inspired it. It was a rainy Thursday evening in December when Min-jun looked up from grading papers to find a familiar figure standing in the doorway of his classroom. So Young was soaked from the rain, her hair plastered to her head and her coat dripping onto the floor. She looked nervous and uncertain, but she was there, in Busan, in his new life, and Min-jun felt his heart stop beating for a moment before resuming at double speed. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," he replied, hardly daring to believe she was real. They stared at each other across the empty classroom, and Min-jun could see the same mixture of emotions in her eyes that he felt churning in his chest, love and hurt, and tentative hope, all tangled together. Your father came to see me. So, Young said finally. I know. I asked him not to, but he said some things needed to be said. He told me about all of this. She gestured around the classroom, taking in the student artwork on the walls, the stacks of books on his desk, the comfortable chaos of a life dedicated to teaching and learning. Did he also tell you that I think about you every day? Minjun asked quietly. That I dream about you every night? That I would give anything to take back the hurt I caused you? So Young's eyes filled with tears. He said you'd changed, that you'd become the person I fell in love with. I'm trying to be, Minjun said, standing up slowly. But So Young, I need you to know, the person you fell in love with was always real. The corporate prince, the games, the calculating manipulation, that was the mask. The man who sat in your cafe talking about Pride and Prejudice, who walked with you along the river, who fell so hard for your genuine heart that he forgot what he was supposed to be doing, that was me. The real me. How can I know that? So Young whispered. How can I trust you again? Minjun looked at her standing there, vulnerable and brave and beautiful, and felt something settle into place in his chest. You can't, he said simply. I broke your trust, and I have no right to ask for it back. But So Young, I love you. Not the way I thought I loved you before, not as a prize or a conquest, but as the woman who showed me what it means to live with purpose and authenticity. You changed my life in ways I'm still discovering. He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted to. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to take me back. But I needed you to know that every good thing I've done since I lost you has been because you showed me what goodness looks like. So Young was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she looked at him. I hate you, she said, but her voice was full of love. I hate that you lied to me. I hate that you made me doubt everything I felt. I hate that I still love you despite everything you did. I know, Minjun said gently. I hate myself for all of that too. But I also hate that I've spent the last 6 months trying to convince myself that what we had wasn't real. So, Young continued, because it was real, wasn't it? The way you looked at me, the way you listened to me, the way you made me feel like I was the most important person in the world, that wasn't all an act. No, Minjun said firmly. That was the most real thing I've ever experienced. So Young was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if trying to memorize every detail. I came here to tell you that I forgive you, she said finally. Not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to the anger was destroying me. I came to tell you that I understand why you did it, and that I hope you find happiness in your new life. Minjun's heart sank. She was here to say goodbye, to grant him absolution so that they could both move on. He had hoped for more, but he had no right to expect it. Thank you, he said quietly. That means more to me than you'll ever know. I wasn't finished. So, Young said, and there was something in her voice that made Minjun look up sharply. I also came to tell you that I'm moving to Busan. What? There's a lovely little bookshop cafe near the beach that's looking for a manager. So, Young said, and now she was smiling through her tears. The owner is retiring, and she's looking for someone who understands that books and coffee and human connection are more important than profit margins. Minjun stared at her, hardly daring to hope. So Young, I'm not saying I'm ready to trust you completely, she said quickly. I'm not saying we can just pick up where we left off. But I think maybe we could start over, get to know each other again. But honestly, this time, no lies, no games, no hidden agendas. Just two people who care about each other trying to figure out if they can build something real together. The hope that bloomed in Minjun's chest was so intense it was almost painful. Are you sure? I don't want you to uproot your life for me if you're not certain. I'm not doing it for you, So Young said with a smile that was pure sunshine. I'm doing it for me, for us, for the possibility of a love story that's messier and more complicated than the ones I used to read about, but maybe more beautiful because it's real. Minjun crossed the remaining distance between them in 2 quick strides, and when he took her in his arms, it felt like coming home. So Young melted against him, and when he kissed her, it tasted like forgiveness and new beginnings and the promise of a future they would build together, one honest conversation at a time. "I love you," Minjun whispered against her lips. "I love you so much it terrifies me." "I love you too," So Young replied. "The real you. All of you. The good parts and the broken parts and everything in between." As they held each other in the quiet classroom, with the rain drumming against the windows and the future stretching out before them full of possibility, Minjun realized that he had finally won the most important bet of his life. Not the cruel wager that had brought them together, but the gamble that love could triumph over deception, that two people could find their way back to each other even after everything had fallen apart. It wouldn't be easy. There would be difficult conversations ahead, moments of doubt and insecurity, the hard work of rebuilding trust brick by brick. But standing there with So Young in his arms, Minjun knew that every challenge would be worth it. Because this time, their love story would be built on truth instead of lies, on genuine connection instead of manipulation, on the solid foundation of two people who had chosen each other with their eyes wide open to both the possibilities and the risks. And that, Minjun thought as he held the woman he loved more than his own life, was the most beautiful bet he had ever made. 6 months later, as Minjun watched So Young arrange books in the window of their seaside cafe while the sunset painted the Busan harbor in shades of gold and pink, he received a text message from Woobin. "Saw the news about your engagement. I suppose this means you're keeping the girl after all. You realize this makes you the biggest fool in Seoul?" Minjun looked at the message, then at So Young, who was humming softly as she worked, completely content in their simple life by the sea. He thought about the penthouse apartment he had traded for a small flat above the cafe, the corporate empire he had exchanged for a classroom full of eager students, the calculated existence he had abandoned for a life built on love and authenticity. "The biggest fool in Seoul," he typed back, "and the luckiest man in Korea." Then he deleted Woobin's contact information, put his phone away, and went to help the woman he loved prepare for another evening of books and coffee and the quiet magic of two people who had found their way to each other against all odds. Because sometimes the best love stories begin with the worst mistakes, and the most beautiful endings come from the courage to start over with an honest heart. And in the end, that was a bet worth making.